The fluorescent lights of the Wayne County Courthouse buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the packed courtroom in Detroit. It was a muggy afternoon on May 21st, 2025, the kind of day where tempers ran hot and patience ran thin. The room was filled with a mix of reporters, activists, and community members, their murmurs a low hum as they waited for the hearing to begin. At the center of it all stood Camille Harris, a 38-year-old black woman whose poised demeanor belied the storm brewing inside her. Dressed in a navy suit that hugged her frame, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, Camille exuded a quiet strength, but her eyes, sharp, unyielding, told a different story. She was here for justice, and she wouldn't leave without it. Camille wasn't just any woman. She was a civil rights attorney, a rising star in the legal world, known for taking on cases of police misconduct and racial profiling. Her latest case had brought her to this courtroom, a wrongful arrest lawsuit against the Detroit Police Department on behalf of a young black man, Darius Carter, who'd been brutalized during a traffic stop. The evidence was damning: body cam footage, witness statements, medical records showing Darius's broken ribs and fractured jaw. But the DPD had fought back hard, their legal team spinning a narrative of resisting arrest and officer safety. Camille had spent months building the case, and today was the final hearing before the judge's ruling. The officers involved, led by Sergeant Richard Foley, sat at the defense table, their faces a mix of defiance and unease. Foley, a 50-year-old veteran with a grizzled beard and a permanent sneer, had a reputation for bending the rules and the law to fit his prejudices. He'd been the one to slam Darius against the pavement, to ignore his pleas, to laugh as he cuffed him. Foley's record was a laundry list of complaints, most dismissed or buried by a system that protected its own. But Camille had dug deep, uncovering a pattern of violence that spanned decades. She'd made it her mission to take him down. As the hearing began, Camille stood, her voice clear and commanding as she presented her closing argument. "Your Honor," she began, her eyes sweeping the room. "This case isn't just about Darius Carter. It's about a system that allows men like Sergeant Foley to abuse their power with impunity. It's about a young man who was beaten for the crime of driving while black. We have the evidence video, witnesses, medical reports. The truth is undeniable. Sergeant Foley and his team must be held accountable." The room was silent, her words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Judge Evelyn Monroe, a stern woman in her late 60s, nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. Foley shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. He hated Camille, hated her confidence, her intelligence, the way she refused to back down. To him, she was everything he despised: a black woman who dared to challenge him, who dared to win. The judge recessed for deliberation, and the courtroom buzzed with tension. Camille sat at her table, reviewing her notes, her mind racing. Darius sat beside her, his hands trembling slightly. "You think we'll win?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Camille placed a hand on his arm, her smile warm but firm. "We've got the truth on our side, Darius. That's what matters." But the truth wasn't always enough, not in a city like Detroit, not in a system that often turned a blind eye to its own flaws. As the crowd began to disperse for the recess, Foley and his team stood, their voices low but heated. Foley's eyes locked onto Camille, a sneer twisting his lips. He leaned over to one of his fellow officers, whispering something that made the man smirk. Camille caught the exchange, her stomach tightening. She knew that look. She'd seen it too many times in courtrooms, on the streets, in the eyes of men who thought they were untouchable. She stood, gathering their files. When Foley approached, his stride purposeful, his presence menacing, the bailiff, a young man named Carter, was at the other end of the room, distracted by a group of reporters. The other officers lingered nearby, their eyes on Foley, their expressions a mix of curiosity and amusement. "You think you're real smart, don't you?" Foley said, his voice low and dripping with venom. He stopped inches from Camille, his bulk towering over her. "You think you can come in here, make a fool out of me, and walk away?" Camille didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm doing my job, Sergeant. If you feel foolish, that's on you." Foley's face reddened, a flush creeping up his neck. "You don't know who you're messing with," he snarled. "I've been on this force longer than you've been alive. You think you can take me down? You're nothing." The room went quiet, the tension palpable. Darius stood, his hands raised, trying to defuse the situation. "Camille, let's just go," he said, his voice shaky. But Camille didn't move. She couldn't. She'd spent her career fighting men like Foley, and she wasn't about to let him intimidate her, not here, not now. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "I'm not nothing. I'm the woman who's going to make sure you pay for what you did to Darius, and to every other person you've hurt." Foley's eyes flashed with rage. "You bitch!" he spat. Before anyone could react, he drew back his fist and punched Camille in the face, the force knocking her to the ground. The courtroom erupted in gasps and shouts. Darius lunged forward, trying to help, but another officer grabbed him, pinning his arms. Camille's head spun, pain exploding across her cheek, her vision blurring. She tasted blood, her lips split. But she didn't cry out. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The bailiff rushed over, shouting, "Stand down! Foley, stand down!" But Foley wasn't listening. He loomed over Camille, his face a mask of fury. "That's what you get for running your mouth." He growled, "Stay down!" The room was chaos, reporters snapping photos, activists shouting, officers scrambling to intervene. Camille pushed herself to her knees, her hands trembling, her breath ragged. She looked up at Foley, her eyes burning with defiance. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she said, her voice low but unwavering. Foley laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Yeah, who's gonna stop me? You?" Camille didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth would speak for itself soon enough. By the next morning, the incident was national news. Footage from a reporter's camera had gone viral on X, racking up tens of millions of views. The grainy video showed Foley's punch, Camille's fall, the chaos that followed. Hashtags like #JusticeForCamille and #FireFoley trended worldwide, and protests erupted outside the courthouse, with crowds chanting for accountability. News outlets ran the story on a loop. Racist cop punches, black attorney in courtroom during police misconduct hearing. Pundits debated, activists rallied, and the public's outrage grew with every share, every retweet. Camille sat in her office at the Harris & Associates law firm, an ice pack pressed to her swollen cheek, her phone buzzing nonstop. Her lip was stitched, her face bruised, but her spirit was unbroken. Her partner, Aisha Monroe, a fierce litigator in her own right, paced the room, her voice trembling with anger. "This is assault, Camille. In a courtroom, no less. Foley's done. We're filing charges criminal, civil, the works." Camille nodded, her expression grim. "I know. But this isn't just about me. It's about Darius, about every client we've ever had who's been hurt by men like Foley. We can't let this slide." Aisha stopped pacing, her eyes softening. "You're right. But you need to take care of yourself, too. You're not just a lawyer. Camille, well, you know." Camille's lips twitched into a small, bitter smile. "Yeah, I know." The call came an hour later. It was from Judge Monroe. her voice tight with urgency. "Ms. Harris, I need you back at the courthouse. We're holding an emergency hearing on the incident. I've also got new information about your status." Foley's in for a shock. Camille's heart raced, but she kept her composure. "I'll be there," she said simply. The courthouse was a madhouse when Camille arrived. Flanked by Aisha and a small army of supporters, protesters lined the streets, their signs reading "No justice, no peace and fire, Foley now." Inside, the air was thick with tension, reporters clamoring for a statement, activists demanding accountability, officers whispering among themselves. Camille walked in with her head high, her bruised face a stark reminder of what had happened. Darius was there, his eyes filled with guilt and gratitude, and he hugged her tightly. "I'm so sorry." "Camille," he whispered, "this is my fault." "No," she said firmly, pulling back to look at him. "This is Foley's fault, and he's going to pay." The emergency hearing was held in a larger courtroom, the room packed to capacity. Judge Monroe presided, her face a mask of fury. Foley sat at the defense table, his lawyer at his side. But his bravado was gone. He looked smaller, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting nervously. The other officers involved in Darius's case sat nearby, their faces pale. They knew the tide had turned. Judge Monroe called the room to order, her voice sharp. "We are here to address the assault on Ms. Camille Harris by Sergeant Richard Foley in this very courthouse," she began, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Foley. "This is an unprecedented breach of conduct, and it will not be tolerated. Ms. Harris, do you wish to make a statement?" Camille stood, her voice steady despite the pain in her jaw. "Your Honor," she began, her eyes sweeping the room. "Yesterday, I was punched in the face by Sergeant Foley in front of this court. He attacked me because I dared to hold him accountable, because I dared to fight for justice for my client. Darius Carter, this isn't just an assault on me. It's an assault on the very principles of this system. Sergeant Foley has a history of violence, of racism, of abuse. He's a danger to the community, and he has no place wearing a badge." The room murmured, the weight of her words sinking in. Foley shifted in his seat, his face pale, his hands clenched. His lawyer, a slick union rep named Thompson, stood to object, but Judge Monroe silenced him with a look. "You'll have your turn." "Mr. Thompson," she said coldly, "but first, there's something the court needs to know." She turned to Camille, her expression softening slightly. "Ms. Harris, I've been informed of your special status. Would you like to share that with the court?" Camille nodded, her gaze locking onto Foley's. "I'm not just a civil rights attorney," she said, her voice clear and unyielding. "I'm also a federal investigator with the Department of Justice, working on a special task force to investigate police misconduct and corruption. I've been embedded in Detroit for the past 3 years, gathering evidence on officers like Sergeant Foley, evidence of brutality, racial profiling, and systemic abuse. My work has led to the convictions of 12 officers across the state, and I've been collaborating with the FBI to build a case against the DPD." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Foley's face went white, his mouth falling open. His lawyer froze, his objection dying on his lips. The other officers exchanged panicked glances, their careers flashing before their eyes. Camille continued, her voice steady but laced with fire. "Sergeant Foley didn't just punch a lawyer. He punched a federal agent, and I have the full weight of the DOJ behind me to make sure he faces the consequences." The courtroom exploded, reporters shouting, activists cheering, officers scrambling to distance themselves from Foley. Judge Monroe banged her gavel, her voice rising over the chaos. "Order," Order in the court. When the room finally quieted, she turned to Foley, her eyes cold. Sergeant Foley, you are hereby stripped of your badge, effective immediately. You will be arrested on charges of assault, and I'm recommending a full investigation into your conduct by the Department of Justice. Bailiff, take him into custody. The bailiff moved swiftly, cuffing Foley's hands behind his back. Foley struggled, his voice a mix of rage and desperation. This is a setup, he shouted. She's lying. You can't do this to me. But no one was listening. The crowd cheered as Foley was led away, his career in ruins, his future uncertain. Camille watched, her expression unreadable, her heart pounding. She'd won for herself, for Darius, for every person Foley had ever hurt. But the victory felt heavy, the weight of the fight still pressing down on her. Judge Monroe turned to Camille, her voice softer now. Ms. Harris, the court apologizes for what you've endured. As for the original case regarding Darius Carter, I'm ruling in your favor. The city will pay damages, and the officers involved will face disciplinary action. Darius let out a choked sob, his hands covering his face. Camille placed a hand on his shoulder. Her eyes shining with tears, she refused to let fall. It's over, she whispered. You're free. Outside the courthouse, the cameras were waiting. Camille stepped into the sunlight, her bruised face a testament to her resilience. Her supporters at her side. She spoke briefly, her voice steady but tired. This isn't just about me, she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. It's about every person who's ever been hurt by a system that's supposed to protect them. We won today, but the fight isn't over. We keep going. The crowd roared, their chants echoing through the streets. Camille looked at Darius, at the activists, at the city she'd fought so hard to change. She felt the ache in her jaw, the fire in her chest, the weight of the battle she'd won and the ones still to come. Back at her office that evening, Camille sat alone, a glass of bourbon in her hand, the city skyline stretching out before her. She thought of her father, a civil rights activist who'd marched in Selma, who'd taught her to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. She thought of Foley, his career in tatters, his power stripped away. And she thought of the work still ahead, the cases, the clients, the systemic change she had dedicated her life to. She raised her glass, a small, defiant smile playing on her lips. To justice, she whispered, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe.